The campfire crackled, boots stomped in rhythm, and laughter rolled across the dusty training ground. A single father named Jack Carter, 38, stood at the edge, ignored, dismissed, treated like he didn't belong. But when his sleeve slipped and a tattoo of an elite unit burned into view, the air changed. Whistles dropped. Conversations stopped. Every eye locked on him, and silence gripped the camp. They thought he was nobody until that moment. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more videos like this. Let's begin. Asterisk asterisk, move it, rookie. One of the younger men barked, shoving past Jack as if he were trash in the street. Dust kicked up, coating his boots. Jack clenched his jaw but said nothing. Years of being overlooked had taught him patience, but then a small voice cut through the noise. "Sir? You dropped this." It was a boy barely 12 carrying a tray of water bottles for the cadets. Jack recognized him. Daniel, the camp cook's son. Jack smiled, crouched, and took the bottle the boy held out. "Thanks, buddy. You saved me from drying out," Jack said warmly. The boy's grin widened. It was kindness in the smallest form, something Jack knew the others here had long forgotten. Yet across the training field, Lieutenant Harris, a sharp-eyed officer in his 30s, was watching. He smirked. "Don't waste your gratitude on nobodies, kid," Harris barked. "Carter, you're just here because they needed numbers. Don't act like you're one of us." Jack stood straighter, his expression unreadable. "I'm not acting," he said calmly. "I'm just here to pull my weight." Snickers spread. Men whispered. They saw only a single father, struggling, ordinary. No one knew the shadows that followed him, the weight of a past carved into his skin. That weight was about to surface. As the whistle blew and drills began, Jack kept up with every run, every push-up, every crawl through dirt. Sweat poured down his back. His shirt clung to him. And when he finally rolled up his sleeve to wipe his forehead, the camp froze. An eagle, razor-sharp wings inked with precision, spread across his forearm. Below it, a series of numbers and insignias only a few in this camp would recognize. Elite, classified, deadly, lieutenant. Harris's jaw slackened. The color drained from his face. "That's impossible," he whispered. The boy Daniel looked up at Jack with awe. "Sir, you were one of them?" Jack didn't answer. He simply pulled the sleeve back down, eyes steady. "Doesn't matter who I was," he said quietly. "What matters is who I am now." But the silence that followed was louder than any shout. And for the first time since arriving, Jack Carter was no longer invisible. The silence that followed Jack's tattoo reveal was heavy like a storm cloud pressing down on the camp. The men who'd mocked him just minutes earlier now stared as though they were seeing a ghost. The only sound was the distant creak of ropes on the obstacle tower swaying in the wind. Lieutenant Harris recovered first, though his voice lacked its usual bite. Where did you serve, Carter?" he demanded, though his tone carried unease instead of authority. Jack's eyes were calm, steady. "That's not for discussion here." He turned back toward the training track, picking up the weighted pack that had been tossed at his feet earlier. He hoisted it over his shoulders with ease, muscles straining against the weight, and started running again. For the first time all afternoon, no one laughed. No one dared. The recruits fell in behind him, instinctively matching his pace. Even Harris, though gritting his teeth, joined the run. Something about Jack's steady rhythm, his refusal to boast, his refusal to even explain, that's what rattled them the most. He didn't need to prove anything. His very presence screamed that he'd already proved himself somewhere else, in places darker than they could imagine. Daniel, the cook's son, trotted along the side of the track, clutching empty bottles in his small arms. He stared at Jack like he'd just witnessed a superhero step out of hiding. "Sir," he whispered when Jack slowed near the water station. "You don't let them push you around, do you?" Jack crouched slightly so his voice met the boy's ear. Sometimes silence is stronger than shouting, kid. But sometimes you stand tall when it matters. The boy nodded fiercely, eyes wide, as though he were committing the words to memory. That little spark of kindness, the bond between a hardened man and a boy craving a role model, was enough to soften the edges of Jack's otherwise cold world. Back in the barracks, whispers filled the air. I swear that insignia was from Black Ops Division. No way, those units don't even exist. Why's he here if he's that guy? Jack sat on the edge of his bunk, cleaning his boots with deliberate calm. Harris stormed in, his face red, fury mixed with fear. You think that little trick's gonna scare us? Harris spat. You're just hiding behind a tattoo. A washed-up vet who can't let go of the past. Jack's eyes lifted slowly. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of his stare. You think it's a trick? He asked, his voice quiet but cutting. Those numbers, they don't fade. They're burned into me. Not for glory. Not for respect. For every name I carry with me, men who didn't come home. For the first time, Harris looked shaken. The recruits shifted uncomfortably. Jack hadn't raised his voice, but the honesty in his tone carried a heaviness no drill sergeant could fake. That night, Daniel slipped into the barracks with a tray of food for the men. Most waved him off, but Jack smiled and took a plate. You didn't have to, kid. My mom says you probably don't get treated right here, Daniel said shyly. She told me to make sure you eat. Jack's throat tightened, though he kept his expression neutral. He reached out, ruffling the boy's hair gently. Tell your mom she raised a good man in the making. The boy beamed before scurrying off. Tray clattering. That simple kindness, food offered with no expectation, hit Jack harder than the camp's jeers. In a place where men measured strength by who they could break down, this boy's compassion reminded him of the strength it took to build someone up. The next morning, training intensified. The obstacle tower loomed 20 feet tall, ropes dangling, planks shaking. Harris smirked as he called out, Carter, let's see if your past can climb faster than your present. The recruits chuckled nervously, tension still in the air. Jack didn't flinch. He walked to the base, tightened his gloves, and began to climb. Every movement was precise, efficient, no wasted energy. His body moved with the memory of years spent in harsher terrains. Halfway up, the plank beneath him cracked. Gasps echoed. One wrong move and he would have fallen, but Jack didn't panic. He shifted weight, latched onto the next rope, and kept climbing. Within moments, he was at the top. The camp erupted in stunned silence again, broken only by Daniel's cheering voice. Mr. Carter did it. He did it. Jack glanced down, not at Harris, not at the other recruits, but at the boy. He raised a hand in salute. The turning point came later that day. A storm rolled over the camp, rain battering the grounds, turning dirt into mud. Training continued, but exhaustion hit hard. One of the younger men slipped on the rope course, his leg twisting violently. He screamed, clutching his ankle. The others froze, unsure what to do. Harris barked orders, but panic blurred his commands. Jack didn't hesitate. He sprinted through the mud, slid to his knees, and braced the injured man. Hold still, he ordered. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority, the kind that made everyone listen. He stripped off his jacket, used it to stabilize the ankle, then carried the man across the course on his back while rain poured down. The weight didn't matter. Jack's pace never broke. When he laid the recruit gently on a stretcher, everyone stood in silence. The boy Daniel peeked from the mess hall, eyes wide. Harris, soaked and humiliated, could only stare. You. Why are you even here? Harris finally asked, his voice cracking under the weight of his own pride. Jack wiped rain from his face. Because sometimes the world thinks single fathers are nobodies. Because I needed to prove to myself, not to you, that I could still fight. For my son. For his future. That night, the campfire burned low. No one mocked Jack anymore. Men who once laughed now sat close, stealing glances of respect. Daniel sat beside him, sipping hot cocoa, his small shoulders brushing against Jack's arm. "You really were somebody important, weren't you?" Daniel whispered. Jack looked into the flames, voice low. "I was somebody broken. Now I'm just trying to be somebody better." For the first time, Harris said nothing. He stared at the fire too, the arrogance drained from him. And though no one dared to admit it aloud, every man at that camp knew Jack Carter wasn't just one of them. He was more than they'd ever be, and it all started with a tattoo that told the truth no words could. The fire had nearly died when the tension finally broke. Harris tossed a twig into the flames, his jaw tight, his pride unraveling. He'd spent the whole day watching Jack turn every insult into silence, every doubt into proof, and every failure into strength. And though Harris didn't want to admit it, respect had replaced resentment in the camp. But he couldn't let go. "Not yet. You think carrying one kid out of the mud makes you a hero again?" Harris snapped, though his voice lacked its usual sting. "You're still just a single father trying to relive the past." Jack looked up, his eyes calm but cold. The recruits around the fire shifted uncomfortably. They were tired of the lieutenant's venom, and this time, they weren't laughing along. "I'm not trying to relive anything," Jack said quietly. He held the younger men's eyes, not Harris's. "I'm trying to show my son, show kids like Daniel, that you don't have to be defined by how the world treats you. You can be defined by what you give back." The boy's name hung in the air. Daniel had snuck closer again, his small hands gripping a tin cup of cocoa. He stared at Jack like a son would stare at a father he wished he had. Harris's lip curled, but before he could spit another insult, one of the recruits, Parker, barely 20, spoke up. "Lieutenant, with respect, he carried me today. If it wasn't for him, I'd be in the hospital with a shattered ankle." "You didn't move." "He did." The silence that followed was brutal. Harris's authority cracked like glass. Jack didn't gloat. He simply leaned forward, feeding the fire another log. "Respect isn't given by title," he said softly. "It's earned in the mud, in the moments no one else wants to step into." The next day, drills began before dawn. Rain still soaked the ground, fog curling between the barracks. Harris called the men out for endurance trials, but his voice trembled when he barked Jack's name. Everyone could hear it. Jack carried his pack, as always. He didn't look for approval, didn't wait for recognition. But something shifted. Instead of running behind him, the recruits ran beside him. They matched his pace, not out of mockery, but out of loyalty. Even Harris trailed at the back, unable to shake the truth staring him in the face. By midday, the men were exhausted. Harris pushed harder, his pride desperate to reassert itself. He ordered rope climbs, push-ups in the mud, sprint drills. Men collapsed, groaning. But Jack never slowed. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't ego. It was purpose. Every drop of sweat carried the image of his son's face. Every strained muscle whispered the same thought. "I have to show him that I didn't quit." At one point, Daniel appeared at the edge of the field, balancing a tray of sandwiches his mother had made. His small voice broke through the drills. "Mr. Carter, you can do it." Jack smiled through his sweat, raising a hand without breaking stride. The recruits chuckled softly, their exhaustion lightened by the boy's innocent cheer. It wasn't just Jack inspiring them. Now the boys' admiration for him had spread like wildfire. That evening, Harris cornered Jack near the equipment shed. The storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and heavy with damp earth. Harris's face was pale, his eyes flicking nervously toward Jack's covered arm. "What do you want from me?" Harris asked, his voice raw. "You've got the men. You've got their respect. You've got mine. So why are you here? Why crawl back into this mud when you had everything once?" Jack tied the last rope on a rack, then turned slowly. His voice was steady. "Because when my son looks at me, I don't want him to see a man who quit. I want him to see someone who stood back up, even when the world shoved him down. For the first time, Harris didn't argue. He just looked away, jaw tight. Jack added, and maybe when Daniel the cook's boy looks at me, he'll see the same thing. Because kids don't remember medals. They remember moments. They remember who showed up. The words pierced deeper than any threat. Harris turned on his heel and walked away, shoulders slumped. The final test came on the last day of camp. A grueling 20-mile march with full packs through hills and swamps, designed to break even the strongest. By the 10th mile, Parker was limping, his ankles still tender. 2 others were struggling under their loads. Harris called for pace to continue, but Jack stopped. "We move together," Jack said firmly. The recruits hesitated, glancing at Harris. But then they nodded, one by one. For the first time, it was Jack's command they obeyed. Jack redistributed weight, taking the heaviest pack himself. He shifted Parker's arm over his shoulder. Mud sucked at their boots, sweat poured, but they moved. Not quickly, not cleanly, but they moved together. By the time they reached the finish line at dusk, the camp commanders were waiting, arms crossed. Harris saluted, but the men behind him turned instinctively toward Jack. The commander's eyes narrowed, then landed on Jack's tattoo as his sleeve slipped once more. A flicker of recognition passed over his face. But instead of calling it out, he gave a single nod. "Well done, men, dismissed." That night, the campfire wasn't filled with laughter at Jack's expense. It was filled with quiet respect. Men leaned closer, asking questions, not about his past, but about his wisdom. He answered only what mattered: how to carry yourself with dignity, how to fight for something worth more than pride. Daniel sat on his lap, tired but smiling. "You're like a real hero," the boy whispered, his head leaning against Jack's chest. Jack kissed the boy's hair gently. "No, kid. I'm just a father. And that's the greatest fight I'll ever win." Harris sat across the fire, silent. When his eyes finally met Jack's, he gave the smallest of nods. Not friendship, not apology, but respect. The camp would never forget the week Jack Carter turned silence into strength. Not by bragging, not by demanding, but by proving that the greatest mark a man can leave isn't the tattoo on his arm, it's the kindness he gives and the courage he shows when no one's watching. And in that camp, among fire and mud, a single father treated like nobody became the man everyone needed to follow.